Well, now that we've got a good idea of what the basic architecture of a CPU looks like, what is it about this fascination that the public has with the idea of the CPU and the media's fascination with the CPU? What is it that makes it so remarkable? Well, I want to show you a picture of a computer. Now, this computer is called the IBM 360, and it was built by IBM in the 1960s. And what's interesting about the computer is, first of all, it's huge, right? The computational power that you have in your iPhone is superior to what is in this computer. All right, so just imagine this, an entire floor of a building taken up by a computer, but right now you have that power in the phone that's in your hand day to day. Interesting little side note, um, if you look at the above the woman's head, you can see the label on part of the computer that says IBM 360. That label, I actually have one of those in my office. I used to work for IBM, and it's really heavy. In fact, it weighs more than just the label weighs more than your laptop. It's a very beefy piece of steel. Okay, so what is it that makes this CPU so interesting, so fascinating? And it has to do with the fact that over the last 50 years or so, there have been a remarkable decrease in the cost, in the speed, and in the size of the CPU. So a question you might want to ask is, oh, and also power. So remarkable changes in these. Now, this is all related to an observation that was made by a man named Moore. So this gentleman had a PhD in electrical engineering, and he worked for a company that made computer parts, but then he decided to found his own company. You may have heard of it with a few of his buddies. You may have heard of it. The company is called Intel. So Mr. Moore is very, very rich. But in the 60s, he was making an observation that it seemed like the number of transistors that let me make sure I've got this right. Number of transistors that it was possible to place on a chip at reasonable cost was doubling every 1.5 to 2 years. So Moore made this observation in 1965, and I think he published it in a small paper at a conference where a whole bunch of other people that worked on chip manufacturing were attending, and they said, "Man, you are crazy. There's no way that's going to continue, because something that doubles at a set rate of time, and if that rate of time is linear, means that you have something that's called exponential growth. So if this is a graph, and this is time going this way, and this is number of transistors going this way, then what Moore was saying is that you have a graph that looks like that. Exponential growth is very, very difficult to maintain in anything. Eventually, it exhausts itself. So folks thought he was crazy, but as it turns out, he's not crazy. We have been able to do this, place more and more transistors at a reasonable cost in roughly the same size space every 1.5 to 2 years. So what does that mean if you can do that? All right, because this is not typically how the media would present uh, the information about Moore. And by the way, this has a name. It's called Moore's. Ooh, I got something funny going on here. Moore's Law. All right. So uh, what are the ramifications of this? Putting more and more transistors in the same size space. Well, there's a lot of benefits. All right. And so if you think about it, one of the big ones is um, performance. So let's say these are two transistors, all right, in version one of a CPU, all right. These are two transistors, and they have to talk to each other to do, let's say, addition, all right. So this transistor here has to communicate to this transistor here to make the division operation work, all right. Well, let's say it's now 2 years later, and we've made a new version of the chip, version 2 of the chip. All right, and now we've halved the distance between the two chips because we're able to place, um, we're able to double the number of transistors that we're putting on the same size chip. So we've been able to have it. So the distance between these two transistors is halved, and that means the time it takes for a signal from one transistor to the other is halved, which means the performance of the CPU is now double. In fact, we can say the CPU is now twice as fast because the distance that the signals between all the components in the CPU, the distance they have to travel has been halved. So I hope that makes sense. I have an interesting graph to show you here. And this is showing the number of transistors on an integrated circuit chip. And this is what Moore was saying, that it's doubling every year. Now this graph looks fairly linear. Let me see if I can, I don't know, we'll see if I can get away with this. This might be too nerdy. I'll try this. Doot. All right. That's a sound effect that I generated, by the way. Okay. See if we can paste that image. Cool. And I'll just make it nice and big so you can see it. All right. Now, I just wanted to mark it up to just make a note here. So it looks like, let's do it in orange. This looks fairly linear, right? And I just drew an exponential graph and said that the exponential graph should look like this. However, I want you to just look at the scale over here. This is called a logarithmic scale. So it's not linear. We're not going 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. We're doing 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million. So every few blocks we're going up by a factor of 10. So that's a logarithmic scale. And that's why when you take an exponential graph and you put it on like logarithmic scale, you get something that looks linear. But anyway, what it looks like is this progress is continuing. There's a lot of cleverness that we keep discovering every couple of years so we can cram more and more information on the same chip. So yay, we're just getting more and more powerful devices. Okay, that's, I think that's all I wanted to say about, oh, I did have another cool exercise actually, which we'll do, I guess we'll do it in a sec.